performance impact that we had with previous versions of Kstuff Lite, which would make you have to disable Kstuff when you load a game using the toggle Kstuff payload, or if you're using ShadowMount Plus, it would automatically pause Kstuff after 15 seconds of loading a game, and that's because Kstuff Lite has a performance impact, or had a performance impact, with the previous versions, where games would take longer to load, they would have frame rate stutters, lag in your games. Because of this issue, so we had to disable Kstuff temporarily after loading the game, so this should overall help with stability, and it's less things to go wrong on your console having to worry about pausing and unpausing Kstuff. Now you can just keep Kstuff running when you're loading your games, and there will be a minimal to no performance impact noticed compared to the previous version. So just to show this as an example, in this example I'm running Kstuff 1.08 on the right, and Kstuff version 1.07 on the left, and we're doing a test to see how long this game takes to load. I always use this game, Crash Team Racing Nitro Field, because it has notoriously long loading times. The higher the update the game is running, the longer the load times take. So with Kstuff Lite's version 1.08, you can see directly here that it only takes around 20 seconds, just over 20 seconds to load. And again, I'm not pausing Kstuff at all here. With both of these versions, Kstuff is running. So you can see that only took just over 20 seconds. Whereas 1.07 is still going, and 1.07 takes about twice the amount of time to load this game. With 1.07 running, it takes around 40-something seconds. So you can see how big of a difference this makes. Now, obviously, with Kstuff 1.07, we could disable Kstuff with the Kstuff toggle or with ShadowMount Plus after the game is loaded and get similar load times. But the fact is, we now don't have to with version 1.08, and that is what makes the big difference here. So to update to version 1.08 from a previous version, if you're using the payload manager, it's fairly straightforward. Obviously, you need to be connected to the network on the PS5, and you need to have your network settings configured in the advanced settings to make sure that you have a manual DNS set of 127.0.0.1 to block connections to Sony servers, and then also inside the payload manager, you want to make sure you're running Nano DNS. Of course, I cover how to set this up from start to finish in my main jailbreak tutorial for the PS5 for 12.7T and lower. You can check out that video for more details, but generally once you have Nano DNS running, you can then go to the Manage Payload section, and we should have an internet connection, so we're able to update the payload, so we can update it from here to version 1.08, or go to the cloud repository and select the option to update it here. If you don't have it installed, it will have an install option instead of an update option, so you can just install it directly from here, and that will go ahead and download it or update it if you have a previous version installed to version 1.08. There's also an update for ShadowMount Plus, so you can do the same thing for ShadowMount Plus, update it here or install it if you don't already have it installed. If you do not have an internet connection, you can also just go to the GitHub page on your computer and download the kstuff.elf file, the payload itself, and then just copy that over to the root of a USB drive, plug the USB drive into your PS5, then go back onto the payload manager and go to the settings, make sure Scan USB Payloads is enabled, and then you can go to the Manage Payload section, scroll down to the bottom where you will find the Kster file that's on the USB, and you can select it and move it or copy it over to the internal storage. So once you have it copied over to the internal storage, or you've downloaded it from the cloud repository, you can load it from the dashboard section to load Kstuff version 1.08. Now the current version of ShadowMount Plus will still auto-pause Kstuff. If you want to turn that off so it stops pausing Kstuff now with version 1.08, then you can do that by editing the configuration file. Just load any file manager that you're using, like the web-based file manager or FTP or anything else. And then once you're loaded up into your file manager, you can navigate into the data folder on the console and then go to the ShadowMount folder. And in there, there's a config.ini file that you can copy over to your computer. You want to edit this file. And if you scroll down around 3/4 of the way, you will see this command kstuff game auto toggle equals 1. All you need to do is remove the hashtag at the beginning of the line. That will make the command active, and then change the 1 to a 0, which will stop Kstuff from automatically pausing 15 seconds after loading the game. So Kstuff will remain running after loading your games with version 1.08. Now, although I am using the Payload Manager and ShadowMount Plus, that's technically not supported or recommended by the developer. Kstuff recommends loading Kstuff directly, either through a payload injector, or you can add it to your autoload config in the YouTube jailbreak, so it just autoloads Kstuff instead of the Payload Manager. And also for running your PlayStation 5 game backups, the only officially supported method with Kstuff is the dump installer, also from Kstuff. So if you are running into any problems, I don't really notice any issues using ShadowMount Plus or Payload Manager, and it's good for the convenience, especially on higher firmwares. I haven't noticed any major problems, but certainly on much older firmwares, there does seem to be problems using Payload Manager and ShadowMount Plus to load Kstuff. So if you are running into any bugs or crashes when loading Kstuff, then consider switching to loading Kstuff directly and using the dump installer to install your games instead of ShadowMount Plus. Now, this version of ShadowMount does actually add something new, so this is a relatively new release of ShadowMount Plus version 1.6 beta 16. This version here, it says it's attempting to restore occupied mount points for now FS and prefer fakelib2 over fakelib for game overlays. So it says to replace the fakelib folder in images, use backports ppsa, the title ID basically of your game, and then fakelib2 in the same directory as the image. The image's fakelib folder will not be mounted, so copy all required files to fakelib2. So if you already have a game as an image file and you want to add like a backport, or you want to add the APR emulator or the DLC emulator or anything like that that requires those modules in the fakelib folder, then normally, if that's not already part of your image file, if you have your game compressed into like a PFS image or a exFAT image or anything like that, where it's just a single file, then you'd have to extract the contents of the image file back into the folder and then add your fakelib folder with all the modules and then recompress it back into an image file again. So instead of having to go through that process, you can just leave the image file as is, create a backports folder in the same location as your image file, and then inside that backports folder, you put the title ID of that particular game, and then create a fakelib2 folder inside that folder, and then add your modules for the fakelib folder in there, your backport files, your APR emulator, your DLC, whatever it is that you want to add. You add that in there, and then when you load the game with ShadowMount Plus, it will mount that version of the fakelib folder, the fakelib2 folder, instead of maybe an older one that's already in the image file that doesn't have the backport patch or whatever it is that you wanted to add. And it will allow you to mount those new modules without having to actually replace the ones inside the image file, which can definitely come in handy if you want to add anything to your games, any backports or anything like that you need to add to the game without having to rebuild the image file again. So pretty handy feature that's been added there in the latest version of ShadowMount Plus. So the other big update is to Linux on the PS5. So we now have 7.61 firmware with Linux support, and that will include firmwares up to 7.61 eventually. Right now it's just 7.61 that has got support, but that means there must be some kind of new hypervisor-based exploit to allow this to run up to firmware 7.61. What the flow has said about this here is that PS5 Linux community is growing and people are now adding new drivers for Ethernet, Blu-ray drive, Bluetooth, and more. But the best news is that PS5 Linux is coming to 7.61, released in 2023 via another patched vulnerability. This means it will now work on PS5 Slim as well. Now, it will only just work on very old PS5 Slims, so like the initial release PS5 Slims may be able to run Linux. If you happen to have a PS5 Slim that's on a firmware of 7.61 or below, it was only the very early release models of the Slims that were on firmwares as low as 7.x. Most Slims will still not be able to run Linux, just to be clear, but there will be a small number of Slims that will be able to run Linux if they're still on 7.61 or below. So if you're on a firmware above 6.02 but below 7.61, they will get added over time. It probably won't take too long before they are also ported, so any other 6.x firmwares or 7.x firmwares will get support. If you're really desperate to run Linux right now, you could just update your PS5 to firmware 7.61 with a USB drive. You'd be able to run Linux immediately, or you can just wait for your firmware to get support if you're on a firmware above 6.02 but below 7.61. And the other big deal is that all of the PS5's internal devices are now supported with drivers, so the Ethernet ports, the Blu-ray drive, Bluetooth, and more being things like Wi-Fi also was working previously, and the internal M.2 bay, and the console are all working now under Linux, so you can access all of that now when running Linux on the PS5. And this is great news considering that the Steam machine was recently announced that over $1,000 for that device, and it doesn't seem to be more powerful than a base PS5 in terms of comparing PS5 games running natively on the console compared to games running on the Steam machine itself. So why get a Steam machine when you could probably get a low firmware PS5 that's capable of running Linux now for probably a similar price to what the Steam machine costs, and get the benefit of having two consoles in one. You can run Linux and effectively use the PS5 as a Steam machine to run your favorite PC games and emulators on the console, but then because it's also a PS5, you can still run your PlayStation 5 games and PS4 games on the console too. I would certainly take a Linux-capable PS5 over a Steam machine any day of the week. There's also been a lot more distros added. You can run things like Fedora, Mint, Cassie OS, and Bassite as well. I believe even Steam OS is being worked on to run on the PS5 as well. So lots of additional distros that you can run now on the PlayStation 5. And if you want to learn how to build the distros and get Linux running on your PS5, I do have a full tutorial when it first released that goes over the entire process and even demonstrates running emulators like the PS3 emulator, Xbox 360, and running PC games on the PS5 as well under Linux. So I'll leave that video linked down below. So a couple of other quick updates. There was also this release from Victorious X of the PS5 all-in-one Blu-ray exploits, so the AIO version. So it's now on version 1.25. So this was these kind of original ISO disc that used the UMPX exploit up to 7.61, but it's now been fully updated to support the Blu-ray and patcher, along with the poopsploit added so you can use it to jailbreak up to 12.0. You've got all of the modern payloads that have now been added in here as well. So all of that stuff is now available here with this new ISO, and you can download it right here. You've got the Auto Jailbreak All-in-One ISO, which is now available. So that is available if you're using the Blu-ray Jailbreak. You've got an all-in-one option there. And then also we have this libprospero package from Spen GDK. So this is a work-in-progress library for creating, inspecting, and modifying PS5 packages, GP5 files, PFS, and related files. So the advantage of something like this is that it's a library that you can add into your project. So if you want to be able to manage PS5 packages, these are debug packages, not fake packages, but this could certainly be useful. When we do get a fake package method for the PS5, we could potentially use something like this, because if anybody wants to add the functionality to be able to build PS5 packages into your application as a developer, then you can basically import this DLL file into your .NET project and then be able to manage your PS5 package files with it, which is pretty nice. It could certainly come handy when we get a PS5 thick package option. So anyway, that's going to do it here for this update. Hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the